Tuesday. I would like to say I hope all of you had a good day today. I will say that. I hope you do. Tomorrow as well, for those of you who did. But it's becoming more and more difficult. It's quite obvious that our society, our culture, our way of life is being destroyed around us each day, more and more. And I'm going to be now up front, as I always am. I've been thinking about this for several days and watching it. As many of you know, but some of you don't, top Trump advisor Stephen Miller has become the latest to test positive for coronavirus. It's very possible, don't discount this, that this mass infection of Trump's White House topmost staff was no normal spread, and in fact is a communist bioattack to try to take down the Trump administration and leave it in shambles by the time the election gets here. Think about it. For those of you who would question the ability of an enemy to do that, I'd urge you to read some bestsellers about technology, spying, assassination, murder, and so forth. Very, very simple to do. Could have been done by putting something in an air conditioning system in the White House. Someone could have simply walked through a room and dropped or discharged aerosols. It's easy. Tiny little things do this. Something is going on. I have never seen an outbreak like this at this level anywhere in the world. And the timing, there's no coincidences. Just understand that. Nothing is left to chance. I really view at this time, it's at least 50-50 that the Trump administration has been attacked with a bioweapon, coronavirus, COVID-19. I don't see any other way to honestly evaluate it at this point. It's just not something that randomly happens. Look at the number of people. I was told it's close to 30 now altogether. Too strange. Why now, after 8 months, when this could have happened any time? Right before the election. It raises red flags. I'm not telling you this is absolutely the way it is, but communists do anything and everything that they think is necessary to achieve their goals of domination and utter hegemony. And that's what they're after here. This looks to me like it has all the earmarks of a Bolshevik communist attack on the Trump administration. Just ponder that. You make up your own minds. But that's the way it does look at this point to me. Very suspicious. On top of that, all the top Pentagon brass, the Pentagon leadership, are now in quarantine for 2 weeks after being exposed to coronavirus at a meeting with a coronavirus positive admiral in the Coast Guard. I won't name him, it's not necessary. So all the Joint Chiefs of Staff are under home quarantine now after the Coast Guard admiral tested positive. This is all just too bizarre to be random and natural. I don't buy it. And I'm not paranoid. I think most of you know that. Dr. David Duke is with us this first hour tonight. David, welcome back to the program. How does it look to you?
I think it's very, very suspicious. But I also know that the Zionist elite in this country and across the world are pulling out all stops to take the House of Representatives, to take fully even more than it is now, to take the Senate and take the presidency. And they want to use this power to absolutely usher in something very similar to what you said, a Bolshevik, a capitalist-style Bolshevist government. And people say, Bolshevism, communism, and capitalism, how can you use those those terms in the same breath. But
how about fascist communism? I'll be happy to use that anytime.
I would even call it fascism. I kind of hate when Tucker Carlson or these right-wingers will say these people are Antifa, they're fascists, or these communists in the street. They're not fascists, they're communists. And the fascist movements in Italy were anti-globalist.
Correct. That's correct.
They were absolutely pro-Christian. They supported the Christian church. They supported Western Christian civilization. They supported the European people. They supported private property.
David is talking about World War II fascism in Italy, all right, which was aligned, as you know, right, with Germany. And Germany, as I view it, and I've said this for probably 2 decades, was our last chance at having a world that would be free of a strangling, evil central banking system.
And not because they were trying to take over the world either. It was because...
No, not at all. No.
It was because the communists were. The communists had the International from the beginning. These Jewish Bolsheviks absolutely had world conquest in mind. They said it openly.
World conquest. World conquest.
That's right. Right. And the nationalist movements like Franco in Italy and Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy were not trying to conquer the world, but they were nationalists for their own country, and they were concerned about the threat of Bolshevism and communism. And interesting enough, and it's important to say, whenever we talk about Bolshevism or communism, it's important for us to reiterate for our listeners and those people who are open-minded that, Russia is no longer communist. Russia is not Bolshevik. There's an anti-Russian propaganda in the media. They hate Russia. They hate the Russian people, and they hate the Russian people precisely because the Russian people overthrew the Zio Bolsheviks. And by the way,
David, the Russian people remember full well what Zionist communist Bolshevism did to them, to their country, 100 million dead, and to the Western world. They remember very well.
Exactly. Of course they know. And in fact, it's important for people to understand this in the movement, to go back and think about it. The media never really let the American people think about this before the war. But before the Second World War, there were already 25 to 35 million people in what was Bolshevik Russia, Soviet Russia. First under Lenin, who was also a Jewish Zionist Bolshevik, and then also under Trotsky in terms of the first head of the Red Army. His real name was Lev Bronstein. The very center of the whole Communist Party was Jewish run. And all over the world, the Communist Party, all over the world, whether you talk about South Africa, whether you talk about France, Germany, Italy, UK, Ireland, wherever you want to talk about it, Canada, the United States, any South American country, all over the world, the communist effort to take over the planet was run by overwhelmingly Jews. There were certainly some Gentiles involved. And the financing of the Communist Party came actually from so-called capitalists. The Rothschilds, for instance, who supported the Communist Revolution. Jacob Schiff, and in fact there's a book by the Jewish Publication Society called The Opiate, and it's about the fact that Jacob Schiff was the biggest single contributor to the Russian Revolution, who gave the equivalent of $1 billion into today's money, a very rich man, for the communists.
Oh, that would be $10 billion now, easy.
No, it was $1 billion in the currency of the 20s.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Got it.
It was like 20 million, and that time it was $1 billion.
Understand.
About today, but I always try to be accurate. Make sure everything's accurate as an historian and somebody who's always going to be called out for any mistakes. So Bolshevism, ironically, has always been supported by capitalists, just like George Soros, a hedge fund operator. If you take a look at the Trump campaign against Hillary Clinton, 18 of the 20 of her biggest contributors were Jewish, capitalists. But they also have been supporting things like Black Lives Matter, which, by the way, the biggest fundraiser for it, and they used major capitalist companies to do it. The biggest fundraiser for Black Lives Matter was none other than Miss Susan Rosenberg. And these are the coincidences. Coincidences, you can use that two ways if you'd like.
You sure can.
That continually we run into when we see what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about Trump and what's going on with the election and the effort that's going on against him. Again, we heard a lot about Russian meddling, how the Russians were trying to interfere with our elections, because supposedly some Russians had gotten involved with a couple $100,000 of, Facebook interruption or interruption on YouTube or whatever, Google. Well, Robert Epstein, who is a famous psychologist, who said that we have a real threat from Google because they control 85% of the search engines, he testified before the United States Congress, right? And he said, and by the way, Google is completely run by Zionists, and they promote Bolshevik issues. We've got the testimony of many of their former employees.
They also own it, David. Don't forget that.
They run it, they own it. Yeah, they do own it. It's Sergey Brin, who, by the way, his family were a bunch of communists who fled Russia from the Christian Tsar, right? Because they were communist terrorists and revolutionaries. And they've already given, both these guys and Google, by the way, the whole head for Google for Israel, the Middle East, and Russia, all these countries that the Jews are dealing with and the Israelis are dealing with, is, in fact, a guy named Max Brandt, who's a very strong Jewish Zionist. And they're able to control the way they control the algorithms of these social media things like Google and Facebook. They affect votes. Now, Robert Epstein got before the United States Congress, and in fact, one of the committees, in fact, that Cruz was on, and he says that the Google affected a minimum of 2.3 million votes, somewhere between that and 11 million votes for Hillary Clinton, because of the way of the experiments they did with the algorithms proving that how you can affect the votes of people who are undecided or people who are making up their mind on these issues simply by changing how the search engines, by changing what articles you're going to read. In other words, let's just say a young person who's open-minded and he's got friends that are pro-immigration and anti-immigration, friends that are pro-Trump or anti-Trump. And the young boy says, well, I want to research this. Let me see what the ideas are. So he types into a search engine, illegal immigration or immigration, migration, whatever, or he types in Trump and Hillary. Well, the search engines are going to give him a algorithm, which, by the way, Robert Epstein revealed. He's Jewish, too, by the way. He's not Jeffrey Epstein, and he's one of those Jews I really admire, and there are certainly Jews who have stood up to Jewish power. And he points out that they changed millions of votes. In fact, Cruz says to Epstein, he says, you're saying that they affected 2.3 million votes by the way they did this algorithm, which you say, by the way, this is Cruz, that people aren't even aware that they're being manipulated in their attitudes or their preferences or their ideas by these hidden hands in Google. And he says, no, sir, that's not what I said. I said a minimum of 2.3 million and up to somewhere around 11 million, somewhere between there. We can't be precise on this, but we can look at the algorithms. We have seen the mass media, including Fox News. As you probably know, you can look up the background of Chris Wallace. His father was the famous Mike Wallace, a leftist, a red from years back. When 60 Minutes was founded, he was one of the main people on 60 Minutes, and it was all run by Jewish, basically Jewish communists, and even the neocons in the Republican Party were all Trotskyites. Now, this is no joke. It was set up at the University of Chicago, one of the most leftist communist universities in the country, and all the people that were involved in setting it up, including all the early neocons like Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl and Poderitz and Crystal and all these people, they were all communists, and they all were favorites. In fact, they were just they weren't really communists again like the Soviet Union was after the overthrow of the Zionists, but they were Trotskyites. That was the first head of the Red Army. killed millions of Christians. But they realized that they weren't going to get control of America by supporting or talking openly about Leon Trotsky. So they became, quote, conservatives. And by the way, they were the force against Donald Trump. Now, when you look at Donald Trump, this was not like a left-right issue because the so-called right now, half of the so-called right are run by former Trotskyites and people dedicated to a foreign nation of Israel, which is not a very conservative idea, who are dedicated to people supporting massive immigration meant to ethnically cleanse America and ethnically cleanse Europe and destroy the European and American heritage of both our people and our faith and our values. That's exactly what these neocons support. They were against all the social aspects of the aspects of conservatism. At the same time, they weren't in favor, or opposed, I should say, to major organizations or big capital, because they controlled so much big capital. The most powerful money organizations in the world are the biggest banks, like Goldman Sachs, run by David Solomon today. Years when Trump was running last time, it's always just a change of names, but it's the same group behind it. It's David Solomon now that runs it. Then it was Roy Cohn, and also what was his name? I'm trying to think of his name. Roy Cohn, and the head of Goldman Sachs was, do you remember?
No, not off the top of my head. Don't worry about it. Go on.
I can't think of it anyway. That's life. But luckily, I still have a little more brain than our
David, in this day and age, with the amount of news and information that is falling on our heads and our listeners' heads every day, around the clock, 24/7, it's amazing we can remember what we do. So-called short-term memory loss is rampant, and it's because we're overloaded. There's too much, so don't ever worry about that.
It's Blankfein, by the way.
There you go, Lloyd Blankfein.
That's right. So that's the way it works, and these people have massive amounts of money. Goldman Sachs literally threatened its own employees who worked for them often for decades, many years, hard, dedicated, made them a lot of money, and told them if you gave a penny to Trump or you supported Trump, you would be fired immediately. Now, imagine that. That is extortion. That is blackmail.
Sure it is.
You're destroying somebody's economy, destroying his lifeblood. He works 20 years for a company, but if he supports somebody for president that they don't agree with, they can fire him, right? And destroy, and maybe make him lose his house and can't make his payments anymore.
Destroy his life.
Destroy his life. That's right. And by the way, this tribe works this way because they'll put the word out, and he won't go to any of the other banks and dare to get a job, even if it's a Gentile banker, and that's a very small minority now in the biggest banks. Even if it's a Gentile banker, they will threaten that Gentile banker if they dare to hire someone who didn't go along with the program. So I've never seen anything like this in my life. I don't think you have either. I thought the media was really vicious against Trump last time, but last time they really didn't think Trump was going to win. They believed they were drinking their own Kool-Aid. They saw that Trump was losing in the polls, but they didn't realize it was like the David Duke case when I ran for governor and senator. They used to say I flew under radar. With all the hatred against Donald Trump, there wasn't many people. There wasn't any teachers who have a job that work for a state or local government or a school board, when you're going to have a lot of leftists also in these Democratic-controlled cities. There's not many people working in state government, police officers, even people in the Army. If a person in the Army, an officer, say a general, he's not going to react to a poll that someone says, who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? He can't say Donald Trump because you don't know who's calling you. And if they get you on tape saying you're going to do that, that would be the end of your career. That would be the end of your financial life. You'd become, nothing more than another, quote, fascist, right? But and they call Trump a fascist, and they call him a Nazi, and they call him a white supremacist, and they call me a white supremacist. I'm not a white supremacist. I don't know what in the hell they're talking about. I don't believe in supremacy or ruling over other people. I believe in equal rights for everybody, including white people. I believe that every people white people, black people, whatever, wherever they are in the world, that they have a right to preserve their own heritage, their own traditions. Their
with
own
pride
people.
and with
They're very
respect
excessive.
and with dignity and integrity.
Absolutely. It's these Zionists who are the biggest supremacists on the planet. They're the ones that ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, and now they've been working to ethnically cleanse us to change the demographic so they can outnumber us by packing the room. So here's Trump. All right, every day there's another new vicious attack. They twist everything around. They bring out his family members that felt like they didn't get enough from Trump's father or whatever in the will, or Trump just didn't turn over the money to their father, and who family squabbles, and then they use that to say that Trump is evil and vile. All these lawsuits against Trump, all the attacks, all the it just never. I've never seen anything like it. Every day it's something new, and of course.
Well, it shows what 6 corporations owning 95% of the media can do. They're all owned by the same tribe, same group, same people. Yep. It's their right to. They created it. They set it up. But people need to understand this is not a government agency. The Internet is a private enterprise, and they'll do whatever they damn well want, and they do.
Yep.
That's what people can't understand. So wake up.
So here's the deal. We all, both of us, I think I've criticized Trump a lot over the last 4 years.
He deserved it. He deserves it.
He deserved a lot of it.
Let me speak. David, hold on. Let me set the stage for you.
Me too. I'm saying I did too. I'm not saying you did anything wrong by it, because you should have criticized Trump.
We should have. Here's the deal. I'm going to ask all of you again to put this in mind, and if you run across anybody who's still remotely accessible, tell them. This is not an election about Donald Trump or Creeper Biden. This so-called election is our last chance to vote for a constitutional republic, or you vote for communism. That's it. Left, communism, right, constitutional republic. Forget the personalities. Please give that some thought. Go ahead.
Let me give a couple of examples of this. And he did many things that we were extremely disappointed in, no question. But he also did things that no other person would do. Let me give an example. Let's go back to Charlottesville. There was not a single member of Congress that said, well, look, there are good people on both sides. It's not all one-sided. And Antifa, are very dangerous, radical people who actually attacked his people as well in his meetings. He did that, but more than that, he got up and said that not only statues of people like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, that they were going to be under attack by these same people. But he said also the Confederate statues should stay. That's part of the Southern heritage. And these men were great Americans, too. They fought for a principle. They fought the same principle America was founded upon. And America recognized these men as great men. He's the only guy in the United States government, literally, that openly defended Southern heritage, Southern leaders. And by the way,
it's part of our history, for God's sake.
Of course it is, and it's a beautiful history. The Southerners knew they're outnumbered, but they believed in the true words of the Declaration of Independence that said every people has the fundamental right to determine their own government. That's if people choose that in a democratic fashion or in a Republican fashion, meaning they're elected representatives, they have the right to establish their own government. That was the principle upon which America was founded from the British Empire. And the Southern people wanted secession. And by the way, it wasn't slavery. In fact, Lincoln said the war was not about ending slavery. He said it again and again. The Republican Party proclaimed it. They wouldn't have even got a lot of the people in the North, including Kentucky, which was a slave state, and Maryland was a slave state, right? We can go on, Delaware. They wouldn't have even got the fight approved if they were saying that they were doing it. I'm not for slavery. And Robert E. Lee, the great Robert E. Lee, the most honored man in the South, said that slavery had to go, and it would go eventually. But the South fought for the idea.
It was already being replaced by mechanization, farm implements, all of it.
It was, and there was no need for any war to remove slavery anywhere in the world. It's certainly, and this is a good example of what you and I talk about. You were very a man of peace. You believe in peace. You're anti-war. And war should be the very last resort for anything, because when you think about it, I'll just give you an example this way. Biden, and then I'm going to relate it to the South. Biden's wife gets up on NPR the other day. She's on NPR News, and she says, the guy says to him, says, well, don't you think we should, Biden says we should stay in Afghanistan and stay in this war. And Trump says we shouldn't. Don't you think 20 years is enough? And you know what Biden's wife said? She said, no. She said, don't you understand? We have to stay in Afghanistan. We have to keep this war going for women's rights. Does
what?
she?
What? For women's
rights? Because
that's why we're in Afghanistan.
Taliban
in her head,
women's rights. I mean,
wow.
Does she have? What a dumb idiot. Well, she's just controlled by the Zionists because the Zionists want us over there. But what a dumb idiot. Does she know how many little girls have been killed by the bombs of that war and the fighting and the hunger and the disease and destruction? Does she have any idea how many women and wives and families were destroyed in that war on both sides? Does she have any idea of how many women at home lost their husband? Our young girls lost their daddies in those wars. Our their father, our mother these days come home with half their face blown away, or with terrible burns that they have to look at and just almost cry about every day they see them in empathy with their suffering. And this is the kind of insanity that we have in this world right now. The Zionists want to have a globalist power over the world, and they don't care how many lives this takes. And that's the thing about COVID. They told us that COVID-19, was the greatest disease ever and all this, and we had to lock down. Well, even in Britain, the British government did a study, just came out a week ago. And the study showed, this was a British government medical study, and they showed that Britain would lose 72,000 people from the lockdown itself, from people who have diagnosed with cancer and they got it too late, or heart disease that wasn't treated, or diabetes that wasn't treated, or suicides, destruction of education, drug overdoses and drug use. 72,000 people that would die compared to the 40-something thousand that died from the disease. And the ironic thing is, even the disease we know isn't really killing that many people. In fact, even the CDC admitted that only 6% of the deaths, that'd be 12,000, by the way, in America, which is a very small flu year, died of COVID only.
Only.
The truth is that this disease is less deadly against children, far less. It's 100 times less deadly against children than the normal influenza is. And the death age is late flu also kills people who are older. But the average age is 80 years old across the globe. It's about 78 here or 77 here. And that's because we are the sickest, fattest country in the world, because our Zionist media, which has promoted these horrible diets, and the Zionist-controlled big pharma. And I can give you examples like the Sacklers that started the drug epidemic we had in this country and drug overdoses with these opioid drugs. $14 billion they made. And Teva is one of the big Israeli firms that also has supported the
big pharmaceutical company, huge.
Yeah, huge. Pharmaceuticals. And by the way, vaccinations have never stopped the big, flu epidemics. And what happens is a new flu comes along, what they call a novel virus. It comes along. There's a big spike, and it kills people quickly, but there's no lockdown, so the spike goes up very quickly. Within 3 months, it's basically gone because there becomes a community immunity that strikes it. And you can look all over Europe, you can look all over the world, everywhere you look, it's the same spike. The places that lock down hard, like in Italy very early, that lock down hard, like in New York City, right? Let me tie something you said together.
Let me tie this together. Afghanistan, Creeper Biden's idiot wife. We're over there for women's rights, for God's sakes. Afghanistan right now has about, rounding it off, about 1,000 square miles of opium production. Where do you think the Sacklers and the other opioid companies get their opium from? They get it from Afghanistan. We're over there guarding the damn opium crop, the opium industry there. All right?
It gets worse than that, because the way they really got the dope the most was from under the previous government. The Russians weren't in control, but the people running against them. The opium trade was huge out of Afghanistan. That was the rebels, right, against the Russians, by the way.
It was also bigger under Obama than it is now. It was much bigger.
Well, absolutely. There's no question about it. And when you start talking about the opium, right? The Taliban, when they got in, they banned opium. When they actually won the war and they got their freedom, they stopped allowing the opium. This is a fact. And only when we started invading the country did they realize they had to have some sort of money to fight the biggest damn military in the whole planet under the Zionist powers. And so then they started selling the opium and promoting the opium. That's the and this is the truth about just about everything. You look at 9/11, whatever. Now, the government's version is pretty different than yours and I. We know the fact that the Zionists and the Israelis, their fingerprints are all over 9/11. But let's just look at the government measure, all right? The government idea is that Osama bin Laden, right, and these jihadists, these radical jihadists, which they were, Osama bin Laden, they weren't the Taliban, by the way, that they did this thing. We find out later that this guy named Gaidan, who is a Jewish guy whose uncle was in the ADL, he became the top advisor to Osama bin Laden. I don't think Osama bin Laden...
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't make this up. No, he was, and he was one of the best. He was one of the top wanted people in the world. He's a Jew from the United States of America whose uncle was an officer in the ADL. And by the way, the Jews had always, even in Israel, they always put kids, even from young boys, in the Arab community, they grow them up with Arab language, they grow them up in the Arab culture and so forth, but they're knowing that they're Jews, as deep agents. And I think that's where the whole idea of the plane attack came from. I'm not one of these people that believe it was a fake attack. I believe the planes did crash into the Trade Center.
Well, of course they did. They were remote controlled.
And I believe this idea was planted by the Zionists. And I also know that the Zionists wiretapped the hijackers' homes beforehand. This was government evidence from the DEA. But just going back to the campaign, I guess where we lose our points, and and we talked about things, and these wars that we've been in all this time, we've been fighting these Zionist wars, and we just to show you how evil things are, is here that Russians are being painted. Oh, it's as Tucker says always. I love the way he says this. Oh, it's the Russians. Well, we know that this whole thing that Trump was colluding with the Russians or whatever is a lie. The one thing we might fault him on is colluding somewhat with the Jews, right? And his nephew. He
doesn't collude with Jerry Kushner. He is told often what to do by Jerry Kushner and the princess. And you think, here, for all of you who think that kind of influence, Jerry Kushner and the princess, they don't have Trump's ear. They got Trump by the short hairs. They control a great deal of what that man does. I believe that.
Sure.
They're both Lubavitchers. Understand that that's a sect of Judaism. You need to look it up and read about Rabbi Lubavitch. You have to understand his position in terms of how he felt about all of us non-Jews. She talk about hate. Read some of it. Lubavitch, understand
and they have. I mean, unfortunately, his daughter did marry and got the family. And they're there. They moved into the White House. The guy had no credentials.
He told them to leave 3 years ago, and they wouldn't go. They stayed there. That's my point. The tribe is not going to allow Trump to lose this election and lose that kind of influence and control that is right there on the Oval Office probably every darn day.
There's no question, though. There's no argument about this, I think, when we look at the facts. And I was looking at this very hard over the last year. There's no question in my mind that the Jewish elite, and you can see this by the big banks, you could see it by all the major media companies. Even Fox News is sabotaging the guy, like Chris Wallace, and another one of the tribe. Right. And even Fox News is it's actually fairly biased. When they ran the Trump convention, the Republican convention, they didn't even, they didn't have anybody in there defending the people. But when Fox News, they had on Donna Brazile, this radical black woman, and these other Jewish liberals, like the former aide to Clinton, right, who used to always be on Tucker's show, giving all the defenses and everything. They didn't, you don't get those kind of defenses really on CNN or any of these other networks. And the thing is, there's no question about the fact. First of all, we know that 84% of Jews, according to Jews' data themselves, voted against Trump, right, for Hillary. We know for a fact that the head of the Republican Jewish Coalition, one of the leaders of it, the chief pollster for them, made the statement publicly after doing research for the organization, said that the only person, hated more than Donald Trump by Jews in America is David Duke. I swear.
Really?
Really? I've got
congratulations.
Right from the media.
How about let's trade the word hated for feared. They fear the truth.
Look, they hate the truth. And they hate anybody who stands up for the truth. It's just like the way they call people like myself a white supremacist when I'm actually a human rights activist. And I believe every people, including European people, have a right to preserve their heritage, their values, to save their children. And we're the ones facing the hate propaganda by the Zionist media. But look at the media, folks. My God, anybody's got open eyes and just turn on CNN for 5 minutes and ABC and NBC and CBS. I watch NBC evening news almost every night in CBS. I DVR it, and then I take 20 minutes and I take the commercials out and I just watch what they're saying. It is so vicious, so vile, and it's almost all of it is character assassination, because they know that when you character assassinate someone and you make them out to be liars, they'll bring on people who was associates, right? And they'll say, yeah, Trump was a big liar, and nobody likes people who are liars. And they'll say, yeah, he betrayed me and he did this and he tried to rape me, all this crap. It's nonstop. It's nonstop. Every day they'd have a new scandal, right? And then when he got the COVID, or maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But when he got the COVID and he went into the hospital, it was a massacre against him. I mean, some of them were saying, yeah, well, we pray for him and so forth. I've got a copy of a Jewish article right in front of me from the Forward newspaper. Mm-hmm. And the Forward newspaper is one of the leading Jewish papers in the country. It's, of course, a magazine for Jewish consumption, right? It's not a Jewish newspaper for Gentile consumption. It's aimed at the Jewish people, and the readership is overwhelmingly Jewish. So here's the headline. They show a picture of Donald Trump with a thumbs up, and the headline reads, let me turn it bigger so I can read it. So this is Donald Trump doing a thumbs up on the screen, a big graphic. This is from the Jewish Daily Forward. So someone you hate is sick. What Jewish tradition says about praying for them? And in the article, they explain how a lot of the rabbis said that, you really don't pray for them. And even in that article, they weren't telling the whole truth, but as I can quote to you from Maimonides, and I can quote to you from, all sorts of aspects from the Jewish Bible where they're saying if a Gentile is sick, you have an obligation not to help him. You have an obligation to let him die, right? Unless that Gentiles are around to see you, helping his dying come along, and then, only then, should you act to help. Should you
act compassionate? I got it.
The utter depravity of it all is just, it's beyond human belief, and they call
it's so many things. We can go back to World War I, World War II. How often do you see the story that approximately, and it may be more, 250,000 Jews of German heritage, German Jews, fought in the German military. They were patriots. 250,000 Jewish Germans. Do you hear about that? Never. Not a word. Because it doesn't hold up with the narrative of the Holocaust. So they don't talk about that. But German Jews cared very much about their culture and their country.
Those Jews that acted patriotic to Germany and in support of the German people and their effort in that war, they were allowed to not only join the military, they were allowed to become officers. They were allowed to be advanced in the military. Of course, they checked them out pretty good because they knew the Jewish role in communism, and they knew the fact that Jews have a long history as a group. And again, the percentage of it was still pretty small in comparison with the Jewish population, by the way. But they did allow Jews who were that way, and there were even composers that were allowed. And what we got to remember again, we got to go back to this again and again. When we got involved in the war, when France and Britain, under Jewish influence and infiltration, talk about meddling in elections, man, you know the Balfour Declaration. You know the Balfour Declaration was done by Britain in exchange for knowing that the Jewish power structure in America, which was huge in the banking system, and they also infiltrated the Wilson administration. They had them by the short hairs. Actually, they were holding up a sex scandal over Wilson, which had been just totally destructive of him in
same old techniques.
Yeah, right. And they got America into the war, the First World War. It wasn't a war to save democracy. The Germans were just as democratic as anybody else, They got America into the war because that was the deal that Britain made with Jewry in America, right? And then, of course, the Second World War, we had great people like, Charles Lindbergh, for instance, one of the greatest heroes in America, considered the most famous and wonderful American. Mm-hmm. He got up in front of thousands of people and he said, look, there's only two people who want this war.
Tens of thousands. They had an American organization called the German Bund. And nobody, there were a lot of Germans here who had emigrated, families for a couple generations already. Nobody wanted to go to war against Germany here. We were forced into it again.
All the polls showed that 70% of people did not want to go to war. But remember, when we went to war, the communists had already killed 25 million Christians. So you Christians should think about that. And you should think about what's going on right now in Armenia. Armenia was the first nation of Europe, as you probably know this. Now, again, Turkey's a little outside of what they call Europe. It's beyond the Bosphorus, right? But the first area that actually, accepted Christianity in terms of its civil government was Armenia. And I have an ancestor, in fact, that was involved in that, direct ancestor. But, so the Armenians, right, are right now, it's a Christian nation. And right now, they're getting in a war against Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is a radical Muslim nation. Now, here's the interesting aspect of what's happening here. Now, this is a Christian nation. The people of Azerbaijan, these radical Muslims, they want they want it back, right? Now, Iran is also a Muslim nation. But guess what country Iran is supporting? Christian Albanians. Iran is supporting them. Turkey is supporting, and that's also a tool of America, and they're also supporting the Azerbaijanians. So, it's really, it's sick. And so we have a Christian nation right now. It's been invaded. It's in danger. It is an ancient European territory. It is an ancient Christian territory. It's being invaded by Muslims. But that country is supposed to be so terrible is Iran. And guess who is fighting?
They're helping the Armenians. That's just amazing.
Yeah, they're helping the Armenians. And it goes further than that. The Armenians know that the Jews were behind some of this behind the scenes. They can't be public about it, right? And some Jews made some public statements for it. But they found out that Israel was supporting the Azerbaijanis and the Turks. They were trying to control it through America. And the Jewish element that really controls
it's confusing for some of our listeners. Azerbaijanis is the Muslim country. Armenia, okay, the Armenian massacre, remember that. That's the Christian country. It's tricky.
And those Christians, by the way, it's the oldest Christian community in the world and the oldest Christian nation.
Is it the oldest in the world? I didn't know that.
Absolutely. Wow. The man who brought Christianity to Europe, the first one was the Elector, the great Christian Elector. And by the way, the Armenian massacre was done in Turkey under Islamic government, but it was in Turkey. But guess what?
1.5 million Turks. At least. A real Holocaust.
It was the Young Turks. And you know what? It was known. It's been proven. The Young Turks were Jews. That's who the Young Turks were. The Young Turks who killed the Armenians.
They're always involved with everything. Yeah. It's just,
right.
It's amazing. The more you dig, the more you find the same threads. And
the Jews worked with the Jews worked for the Muslim invaders of Europe. You probably know that in
yes.
with Turkey. And they actually...
I asked a scholar and Muslim journalist, I said, how many Muslim Arab countries are controlled or severely, heavily influenced by Israel? And I didn't even get finished. He said all of them. All of them. They're pressured, they're influenced, they're penetrated. And if it weren't Israelis or Jews, if this happened to be Bengalis or Hindus, we would be talking about it the same way. Extraordinary influence, extraordinary power, extraordinary hegemony. And it doesn't matter who it is. In this case, it happens to be largely Jewish. So it gets talked about here because it's reality. That's what it is.
It's so obvious, too. I mean, you just have to point it out, because once you point it out and people have the mindset, they can go look it up and they can find out it's true. I mean, for instance, just look at the ISIS people, right? I mean, that was out of Saudi Arabia, right?
And who
even
created
Trump,
Saudi Arabia and the House of Saud? International Zionism.
Exactly. In fact, Trump himself said, look at 9/11 as the Saudis that did it, remember? And even the United States Congress did a big search of this whole thing, and they came out with a report after a year, and they said that the people who did this were the Saudi royal family and the Saudi intelligence. They were behind 9/11, right? But then they stuck it to Trump. They put him under house arrest basically from the time he entered the presidency, threatening him with impeachment, disgrace, and imprisonment, basically, is what they were doing. And the entire impeachment was led by Schiff, big Jewish Zionist, right? Who's, by the way, whose son had a big Mossad T-shirt on, the same Mossad that did the greatest spy scandal in American history, really, the most damage to any other spy in history, had a Mossad T-shirt on. This guy is a radical Jew. You had Engel, who's head of the Foreign Relations Committee, again, but they just had a brand new bill, by the way, that's been presented by the Jewish lobby. I can quote to you again from the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post. And the headline reads, right? Listen to this one now. New bill gives New bill gives Israel the right to veto
any American arms sales to any Arab nations.
Any nation.
We're giving up control. Yes.
Can you imagine another country saying that to a country?
Can't.
We can veto your decision to sell arms to another country in your interest, or without whatever reason. It's unbelievable.
Well, it truly is. I've got it. It's in headlines. It's going up in a few minutes.
From the campaign, you need to get me on at least a week or two, fit me in before this election, because I do believe this is absolutely the most vital election in our lives.
Well, it's our last chance to avoid outright direct communist overthrow of what we have. That's it.
I mean, it's the whole ball of wax. It's camps.
That's right.
It's completely like a light switch.
Re-education camps, which will turn into, he died in camp. Oh, how sad. They're going to use this.
They're even now silencing conservatives, just stupid conservatives, not even people that understand what we're talking about here. But they can turn off the internet like a light switch. You will not be able to put a video up there. In fact, you won't even be able to have a.
Well, they're already doing that. They're not going to shut the. You know why they're not going to shut the internet down, David? They're putting up. What's Musk putting up? 5,000 satellites to blanket the Earth. This is the means of control. This is the means of control.
They don't have to shut down. No, of course they don't want to shut down the internet. They want internet 24/7, but they can shut down anybody they want to from having any access whatsoever. That's what they can do. And that's what they've already said they're going to do. And they're also going to criminalize anybody who dares even stand up against Zionism or stand up against this evil going on, or the communist Black Lives Matter movement, or are opening our borders and legalizing all immigration and making citizens of them, and taking away every right that we have. This is what's on the table now. And I'm not saying Trump's going to save us. And if Trump happens to win, he might, because I think they've overplayed their hand again. But I guarantee you one thing, whether he wins or not, this is the most important election. We need to get Trump in. We need whatever time we can get from him, and we really have to put Trump's, hands to the fire as well. But if Biden comes in, it is like flicking a switch off in a room. If it's evening in most places listening to this broadcast right now, it's like going to your light switch right now, going to your computer and turning off everything, because that's what will be available to people like you and I, Jeff, or anybody else who has freedom of speech or is even a Christian, really a fair and a true Christian. You won't even have the right to have light. You won't have the right to electricity. You won't have a right to have a job. You won't have a right to have a credit card. And I'm not just whistling Dixie here, folks. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you something that you've got to understand, because that's what this election's about.
One quick note about the coronavirus. 1/3 of Kenya's population, millions and millions of people, has already had coronavirus, and the infection fatality rate 0.005%. 1/3 of Kenya's population has had coronavirus, and the infection fatality rate is 0.005. And MSNBC called Donald Trump's return to the White House, communist MSNBC called it his Mussolini moment. That's what they called it. It's so out in the open now, it's not funny. This is communism, which I've been using as a term for many years, and now I'm happy to see other people beginning to use it, because that's what it is. It's Zionist Bolshevik communism.